Well, I mean, first you got to start with the player. We're talking, I'm saying really positive things about Will Smith today. He's a great hockey player. He had a great season. He is, a true, potential impact player in the NHL. Will he, won't he be? We'll find out with time. He was the MVP of the U18 World Championships. Matvei Michkov was the MVP of the U18 World Championships 2 years ago. This is a guy who is
Jesus.
just scores at incredible levels wherever he goes, whatever level. He scored today. He's playing for Russia's senior national team. He scored a goal today. Like this is what this guy does. He is an offensive dynamo. He gets among he is not a perfect player by any means. He is a 5'10", some might say 5'9" winger. He's not an amazing skater. He's not killing penalties in the pro level anytime soon. But he gets among the highest grades I've ever given a prospect in terms of skill and hockey sense. I mean, this is, like I said, there's special characteristics about this player, and I think a lot of scouts I've talked to felt like if he was playing in the CHL, he is pushing Connor Bedard. Doesn't mean he is going to be number one, but he would push him, they think.
Mm.
But there is complications in his case.
Yeah.
The KHL contract that will take him for 3 full seasons after his draft, meaning you are realistically getting him in the 4th NHL season after his draft. If presuming everything goes well with your negotiations. He plays on SKA St. Petersburg, which has a lot of influence and often attempts to re-sign players. Carolina is currently doing that with Alexander Nikishin, who, in my opinion, if he was playing with them right now, he'd be one of their best players. But he signed a several-year extension with SKA last summer. So that's a complicating factor. But other SKA players have come. Yes, Askarov went right away. Yes, Vasily Podkolzin went right away. So it's not a guarantee on
Yeah.
that front. And then you have the war, the war going on between
That.
Russia and Ukraine, and that's a complicating factor. I think what was interesting this week is when the KHL season ended and contracts rolled over on May 1st, is we've seen the last 2 days a lot of highly picked Russians signed with NHL teams. 6, and I believe there's a couple more coming, first, second, third round pick players signed with their NHL teams in the last couple of days, which is interesting. Which, when talking about maybe other Russians, but Michkov is a different case because of the kind of pick you have to use to get him. If you're picking 20, if you're picking 15, you're picking 45, it's a different calculation as opposed to saying no to Leo Carlson, saying no to Will Smith, which are going to be, we think, have really good chances to be impactful NHL players, potentially star NHL players. But again, I think with Michkov, it's one of the most fascinating conversations about a prospect I've ever seen in my time doing this, just because the caliber of this player.
Yeah.
He is a number one overall pick type of prospect.
In your
And
conversations with scouts and executives, how do they weigh that risk reward?
it really depends who you ask. Like you'll find executives who have absolutely no time to do that high in the draft, and others who are like, yeah, no, sign me up. Like you just take the best player, and they would argue, all the good ones come eventually. The good Russians, he means, and like I said, I think it's really going to be organizationally dependent on how the draft order falls out and where certain organizations are with their risk tolerance, with their job security, with their overall philosophy towards drafting Russians, on their specific homework on the Michkov case. So I think that's going to be really dependent, because like I can ask different people in different organizations, and I get wildly different answers on what
Yeah.
they think is the best course of action with him. And ultimately, it doesn't really matter what executives I talk to, like which directors of scouting or AGMs. This is an ownership call. This is a GM call primarily, but every team will say, it all depends what our owner says, because it doesn't matter. All the hockey
That's
guys agree
interesting.
he's a great hockey player.
That's really interesting. And you just laid out a lot of variables, so maybe it's not even fair to ask this last question on Michkov, but I just wonder, how far could he fall? Like, I remember Craig Button talking about this, like with the Coyotes' second pick, if Ottawa falls at 12, they don't jump up. Could he fall as far as 12, where you're taking a second high first-round pick? Is that the time that you absolutely can't pass on Michkov, or is there no chance he's even going to be there at 12?
I'm not going to say no chance, because in a world with a lot of uncertainty towards the top Russians and the situation where Michkov is very unique, I'm not going to sit here and say no chance. But I think there's going to get a point really early in the draft. Once Fantilli is gone, once Carlson is gone, maybe one or two other players, maybe it's Smith, maybe it's David Reinbacher. There's going to get to a certain point in the draft where him versus the next best alternative frankly gets ridiculous, where you're talking about guys who like project as like 40 points second line wingers or something like that, or decent two-way centermen, and you're saying no to a guy who has the potential to be like a really impactful scorer at the pro level. So I think I don't know if that point happens. And again, I think there are organizations that will talk about him in that early tier. But even if you aren't, I think there gets to a certain point, and it'll happen really early. I think somewhere between my best estimate, somewhere in the 6 to 10 range is my best guess as to where he will most likely fall if I was doing a mock draft today. But again, it's really organizationally dependent. If Washington jumps up to 3, for example, that's a much different calculation than if another organization goes up to 2 or 3.
Yeah, that's true.
Huh.
With Ovechkin, yeah.
So interesting.